One of the biggest misunderstandings about generational trauma is that we often expect the pattern to look the same in every person, but the pattern doesn't always repeat through the same mask. It repeats through the same wound. So that's why you might think, well, I'm nothing like my mother. I'm nothing like my father. I rejected that whole way of being. I'm different. And that might sometimes be true at the level of personality or adaptations. But the ancestral pattern might still be running underneath, not because you became the same person, but because the same wound organized you in the opposite direction. So, if your mother collapsed, maybe you became strong enough to hold it all together. If your father disappeared, maybe you performed to be seen. If your family was chaotic, maybe you became controlling to create order. If one of your parents was needy, maybe you became independent so you never had to need anyone. If someone was passive, maybe you became intense to feel prepared. If someone clung, maybe you avoided so you wouldn't become a burden. If someone was quiet, maybe you became loud in order to be heard. If your family was poor, maybe you became successful to prove your worth. Different adaptations, same wound. Sometimes an opposing strategy was necessary to feel safe. Sometimes becoming the opposite was how you survived. But if you're listening to this, something in you is ready for more than just survival. Maybe you want to be free to truly live. So, becoming the opposite of the family pattern isn't the same as being free from it, because the pattern repeats, not always the personality or the adaptations. And like we've been talking about, most of what people think of as their personality is really just survival adaptation. Rebellion is counterfeit freedom. True freedom isn't becoming the opposite of your family. It's discovering who you are when you're no longer being organized by the same wound that you inherited. In the last episode, we mapped the inner architecture of the core wound through a recent trigger. Your adaptations, the body sensations and feelings, the worldviews, the vows, and the identity wound underneath it all. Today, we're going to take that map one step outward into the family lines. You can start to recognize your mother's side, your father's side, the emotional atmosphere that you inherited through each. And of course, if you want, you can focus on just one side at a time so it's not overwhelming. Now, we're not trying to track the entire ancestral origin today. We're also not forcing a story and we're not blaming our parents. We're simply asking, where does this wound feel familiar in the family field? Because the core wound isn't only personal, it's familiar, it's ancestral. And you may be nothing like your mother at the level of personality, but still organized around the same core wound. You may be nothing like your father in behavior, but you're still carrying the same underlying agreement. You don't become free by becoming the opposite of your family. You become free when the wound is no longer the organizing principle of your life. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is Same Wound, Different Mask. The pattern repeats, not the personality. In episode 25, the last one, we explored how the wound is often too close to the self to see directly. So we started with the adaptations because it's more visible. So you had the opportunity to start mapping the architecture of your core wound, and it's okay if that's not complete or fully resolved yet. So now we're going to bridge the inner map, even if it's incomplete, with the family field as we look for the same pattern across generations. This might start to give you more insights. You might get more revelations about your own core wound architecture when you observe it in others, because it's always easier to see the other person than yourself. And the challenge is when your mind thinks that you're free because you adapted differently. So we're not looking for the same behavior. We're looking for the same emotional pattern. We're looking for the same identity wound. We're looking for the same or similar outcome, and we're looking for the same atmosphere. So, I want to give you some examples as a very practical panorama of the topic. We're going to look at how the same wound could have totally different adaptations, which appear to be distinct personalities across generations. So, the first common wound, let's say the wound is I'm powerless. So, let's say one of the parents adapted by submitting, complying, collapsing, staying quiet. Let's say the child adapts by controlling, dominating, rebelling, becoming untouchable. Different adaptations, same wound. Let's look at another one. The wound in common could be I'm unlovable. So maybe the parent's adaptation is chase, cling, overgive, tolerate mistreatment. And let's say the child's adaptation is detach, avoid intimacy, stay alone, reject first. Different strategies, same ache. Let's look at another wound. I don't matter. So maybe a parent adapted through martyrdom, over functioning, people pleasing, resentment. Maybe the child's adaptation is achievement, performance, proving, becoming impressive, different masks, same hunger to matter. And let's look at another one. The same wound could be I don't exist. So maybe the parent's adaptation is silence, dissociation, emotional absence, harshness. Let's say the child's adaptation is intensity, provocation, trying to be seen, or total disappearance. Different expressions, but the same existential imprint. So you see how we're not looking for literal repetition, which would be more of a surface observation. And remember, it's easier to see the adaptations than the wounds, and that's often why we don't connect the dots. So now we're starting to feel into the deeper architecture of the lineage. Let's expand one example a little more. So, a mother might adapt through emotional neediness, merging, suffocation, and using her child to regulate her. A daughter might adapt through independence, rebellion, control, emotional distance, and refusing to need anyone. On the surface, they look like total opposites, but underneath, the same wound can be running. I'm a failure. The adaptations are quite different, but the wound is the same. And somehow, with completely different adaptations, both of them end up in the same place, isolated and feeling alone in the world. One maybe pushes people away through neediness and suffocation. The other maybe pushes people away through control and having heart walls. So across generations, the identity wound may stay the same. They might even end up in a very similar place, even though the adaptations change and they look totally different on the surface. So take a deep breath before we move into this next part. We're going to do a family field inquiry if you'd like to follow along. Now, this isn't meant to be a full healing process. It's a tracking practice, a way of onboarding more awareness. So start with your trigger map from the last episode. And it's okay if it's not super clear yet. At the very least, you might have begun to see your adaptations more clearly, maybe even your primary and your secondary adaptations. So let's begin there. What are your predominant adaptive behaviors? Maybe you tend to fight or attack first, then freeze or collapse for hours or days afterward. Or maybe you freeze in the moment, then later you replay the situation in your mind and you start fighting internally. Or maybe you perform, people please, overdo, try to smooth things over. Then later you feel drained and sad, so you reach for food, alcohol, scrolling, or some other way to numb the pain. Just notice the adaptations first and name them honestly, but without blaming or shaming yourself. You're just noticing them. Then ask, did anyone else in my family adapt this way? Or did someone adapt in the opposite direction? What did they do to feel safe? And take your time with this. Feel free to pause and journal as we're going along. Feel free to go back and listen again. Once you start to see the family tree with new awareness, now I want to invite you to listen for the scaffolding around the wound. That might be family secrets, silences, losses, exclusions, shame, exile, addiction, abandonment, violence, emotional absence, or anything that shaped the atmosphere of the family field. Then see if you can name the identity sentence underneath it, the core wound, or at least something in the vicinity of it for now. That would be something like, I'm not enough, I'm unwanted, I'm too much, I don't matter, I don't exist. And once you have that, or at least again, the vicinity of it, what's the emotional tone of that wound? Maybe it feels like sorrow, fear, shame, agony. Maybe you can't quite name the emotion, but you can find a feeling like emptiness, loneliness, defenselessness, heaviness, failure. The feelings are sitting just one layer above the emotion. It's okay if you can't fully name it yet. You're getting closer. Now, look for that same wound in your mother's line or your father's line without thinking too much about it, just feeling into it. Remember, it's not necessarily the same behavior, it's not the same personality, but it's the same underlying emotional pattern, or maybe you're just noticing the feeling above the emotion. Now we're exploring into the deeper inner territory. We're tracing the wound, not the behavior. We're tracking the pattern, not the personality. And remember, two people can express the same wound very differently. So maybe both are carrying fear, but one dominates while the other submits. Maybe both are carrying deep sadness, but one rages while the other collapses into depression. Maybe both are carrying tremendous shame, but one wears it as superiority, judgment, grandiosity, while the other turns it inward through self-punishment and self-hatred. Different adaptations, same wound. So if you want to take this exploration to explore more of the family tree, let's ask some more questions here. Where might this wound have lived before me? Who carried it quietly? Who fought against it? Who collapsed under it? Who hid it? Who became the opposite of it and yet still remained organized around it? And as you start to feel through those layers of looking into your family tree and just noticing, right, how that might have moved through your lineage, once you sit with that for a little bit, then ask yourself, who might I be carrying this with or for? And notice the tone of the resonance without forcing certainty. So it's not about proving anything or stacking evidence. It's about a deeper listening for what feels familiar in the field. And maybe as you see the pattern more clearly, compassion begins to emerge. Not forced compassion, not intellectual compassion, not a form of bypassing, not pretending nothing happened, but the kind of visceral compassion that comes when you realize that the adaptive behaviors that frustrate you in yourself were never really who you are. They were just how you survived. And maybe the next layer is compassion for those who hurt you, not because what happened was okay, but because you begin to see that they were also adapting around a wound that they might not have known how to name. Both of y'all were carrying a similar burden in different ways. Both of y'all were trying to survive, and the wound was trying to survive too. Now, I'm not saying that you have to reconcile relationships. Compassion isn't the same as reconciliation. Healthy compassion has healthy boundaries. But a hardened heart can feel protective when we don't yet know how to feel safe in other ways. It served a purpose, and I'm not dismissing that. But over time, you might realize, as I did, that condemnation can become a shared prison. You're not only holding the other person under that sentence, you're carrying the weight of it in your own heart. And that affects your relationship with yourself, with others, and with God. I know what it's like to carry that hardness for a long time. Once upon a time, it made me feel safe, but it didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring me connection, and it definitely didn't bring me peace. So remember, forgiveness isn't the same as reconciling a relationship. You don't have to be in contact with someone who hurt you to stop living inside the same prison. This is how the wound pattern hides. It changes costumes, it changes personalities, it changes adaptation strategies, but it's the same ache wearing different clothes. And when you can finally see the pattern beneath the personality in yourself and in the others, something in you might stop needing to fight the people who came before you, even if that fight is only in your head now. This didn't begin with you, and it's not your fault. And while each person, including us, is responsible for their participation, the wound itself was inherited before anyone knew how to name it. Everyone was trying to survive the weight of something they may not have understood. And maybe everyone before you passed it on unknowingly. Maybe you're the generational cycle breaker. You're the one becoming conscious enough to metabolize it differently. That means something new can begin with you. The family's emotional architecture stays the same until someone becomes conscious enough to see it in a new way. Not to condemn the family or yourself, but to see yourself and your family through a wider, softer lens. Because there's only so far that we can go in the healing process when it stays centered around my pain, my trauma, my wound. At some point, the lens can expand. We can begin to see that that which we've carried was never only personal, it was familiar, it was ancestral, and it was part of a larger field. As your heart softens and your perspective expands from self to field, it's humbling. And that humility is part of a deeper transformation. It's necessary for the deeper transformation. So also remember that seeing the patterns isn't a betrayal of your family or or your lineage, though it might feel that way at first when you begin to see that truth that no one else ever acknowledged. The awareness is actually an invitation into liberation. The other day, as I was leaving the organic co-op, I was carrying an 11-pound watermelon in my arms. And I realized it was a great metaphor for what we're carrying around, yet we don't notice. I decided not to push it in the cart to my car because I only had a small bag of groceries over one of my shoulders. And I usually like to park at the back of the parking lot to get some exercise and to have some space away from the noise of all the people trying to compete for the closest spots. But what I noticed is that at first, That 11-pound watermelon doesn't feel that heavy. But the longer you carry it, the more your whole body starts adapting around the weight. It's the same thing when we gain weight. An extra 10 pounds doesn't sound like a lot until you carry a weight around in your arms of 10 pounds and you realize the extra stress that you're putting on your body. You realize how exhausting it is to carry that weight. You notice how your body adapts to accommodate it because the body was built to survive. But carrying a burden also takes a toll on us. So think of the core wound that you've been carrying around all your life. It wasn't your fault. You inherited it. And it wasn't really your parents' fault either because they also inherited it. And your grandparents and your great grandparents, they're also carrying around that heavy watermelon for those who came before them. Now, of course, we're each responsible for our participation. The wound isn't an excuse or entitlement to treat people poorly, but it's actually what makes us not that different than those who came before us. We might have made different choices and we might feel morally self-righteous about that. But remember, generational cycle breaking isn't about superiority, pride, self-righteousness, or rebellion. It's about metabolizing the wound into medicine, integrating the fragmentation into wholeness and coherence, passing forward a different legacy. And I know many of you are parents, maybe even grandparents. I tend to work with a lot of parents, and one of their biggest pain points is the frustration, sadness, guilt, and shame of having unintentionally passed forward the generational burden before they could heal it. People often come to me really suffering with that. And it's admirable because they can admit the mistakes they've made, but they're also arriving feeling trapped in the shame or the guilt. And what I found is that they want to fix their kids. And it's understandable they want to make it right now that they're more aware, they're healing, they're trying to evolve. But the answer isn't trying to fix someone else. Trying to fix someone else is an adaptation, it's a form of fawning, and it's a distraction from the inner work. The transformation is internal, and that's what sends the ripple effects into the field all around you, into your family field, into your relational field, into your ancestral field, and into the collective field. Once you start seeing the deeper patterns, something begins to shift. And when you shift, the family field might respond to it. I've seen this happen in my own family and in other people's families, sometimes in ways I don't have words for. Things I can only describe as the grace of God moving in a family, quietly, without announcement, but unmistakably. In the next episode, we're going to explore that topic and what happens when you bring new coherence into yourself in the family field. Some people in your family are probably going to get triggered, and others are going to hear the new tone and maybe start shifting in surprising ways, even if they have no idea what's happening or why it's happening. That episode will also remind you that you're not here to save, fix, or regulate anyone else into healing because that's not your job. And it's not something you can control. Your job is your inner work. The supernatural miracles come from the divine realm and in divine timing. So as you reflect on your own family line, don't rush to make it neat. Don't force a story. Don't accuse your lineage. Don't turn this into another way to blame yourself or your family. Just begin listening more deeply for the underlying patterns and burdens that everyone is carrying in some way and see what starts to reveal itself. What is that heavy watermelon? If you're tracking a pattern on your dad's lineage, keep in mind that your mom also adapted to that because they're in a partnership, or at least they were for a certain period of time for you to come to be. So somehow his lineage patterns lock into her lineage patterns. It's not the same thing, but it's a match. Everything is connected. The people we choose, the partners we choose, the situations that we choose unknowingly because it feels familiar and it brings what's hidden up to the surface. Those inherited ancestral patterns are seeking completion through us, the living legacy. And when we do the deeper inner transformation, the transmutation of the wound into medicine, that metabolization, we can begin to consciously choose something new and pass forward a different legacy to those who come next. So remember, rebellion isn't the same as liberation. Sometimes rebellion is the same wound facing the other direction. True liberation isn't about becoming the opposite of the family pattern. It's about no longer being organized by that wound at all. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration Podcast. Remember, you're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom that your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.